I'm David Rowan. I am the founding editor-in-chief of Wired magazine in the UK. I write a lot about technology, and I recently had a book published by Penguin looking at models of genuine innovation, slightly rude title, non-bullshit innovation, because it's very hard to find ways to transform an organization that goes beyond the jargon. Which leads me to what I'm working on at the moment. A crisis like COVID-19 accelerates change that was already starting to happen, and it forces your customers, the people who work for your organization, to adapt new ways of working, of consuming, of seeing themselves. So I would argue that this is the moment, more than any time over the last decade, where you need to work out how to transform your business model, to experiment with new forms of getting to market. Because today's organization needs to move fast and be agile. It needs to build in resilience. It needs to give its talent the psychological safety to come up with the ideas that could well be the future of the business. And in a world where now remote work has suddenly gone from eccentric to the norm, in a world where sport for many people has been replaced by e-sport, in a world where education no longer requires a university building, every kind of business, whether you're a dentist, whether you're a designer, you're going to have to adapt. So some of the things I've learned in the approach of the real innovators that seems to work. Well, first of all, they leverage technology and experiment with it at an early stage. And we've already seen with the battle to make sure hospitals are resilient in the face of a virus, 3D printing being used in new ways to create new parts for ventilators when the supply chains weren't working. We've seen accelerated automation, both in transport and the way deliveries were happening. We've seen more robotics. We've seen education become a new experiment in how we can collaborate online. And of course, digital health has leapt a generation in just a few weeks. But I think this trend goes beyond some of the obvious industries. Drones, for instance, are increasingly going to be used not just for delivering things, but for monitoring our environment. We're going to see data transparency in ways as never before. As we're finding with the tracking and tracing of people infected with the viruses, you need a level of trust with the collecting authorities, but if that's established, you will share data, and there's going to be an awful lot more data voluntarily given to the network. We're going to see transformation in industries like food. Already we've seen the growth of aeroponics and vertical farms and meat that has no relation to animals. A crisis forces this experimentation. Another thing that happens when there's a crisis is we get innovation in business models. So I'm based in London, where our city transport, the London Underground, the bus system, has been suffering financially. In Hong Kong, however, they innovated very smartly with a business model where every time they opened a new metro station, they did a deal with real estate developers to sell value for building on top of those metro stations. And now the Hong Kong Metro has the money coming in that allows it not to rely on government subsidies, to keep 99.9% punctuality, to invest in infrastructure, because they thought about their business with a different framing. I'm seeing delivery companies, food delivery companies in the UK, Deliveroo, starting to think about, well, people want their supermarket shop, but they don't want to go into a supermarket. Why don't we partner with supermarkets to use our infrastructure to create a new business line? I'm seeing in education, there are a number of companies rethinking the MBA. People don't want to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars going for a long course. Increasingly, with no certainty of that boost to their salary afterwards, they're going to start working with Jolt, with Founders Academy, with new organisations that sell, mostly online, bite-sized elements of business learnings at a fraction of the price. One thing organisations need to bear in mind if they're going to be true innovators is how to generate an internal culture which promotes experimentation and doesn't penalise those who suggest controversially new things. Also, the culture can go beyond the borders of your organisation to use the crowd. Already in the COVID crisis, we've seen a whole bunch of very effective hackathons and crowdsourced projects to come up with everything from ventilator parts to ways to create sanitising machines using solar energy. Big companies like L'Oreal have repurposed parts of their factory production line to make hand sanitizers. That sort of adaptability and flexibility of thinking we're going to increasingly need. We're also going to rethink what is an office, with increasing numbers of your staff wanting to work from home or from different places. I'm now working with a company in Finland that's creating the decentralized, distributed workplace. They're taking excess desk capacity from buildings like universities and making them available to organisations that don't want to make a commitment of a lease, but still want access for some of their staff for some time in the week. Everybody wins. So you need to prepare also for the secondary impact of this current crisis. It's going to change everything from the handshake, is that now going to be socially acceptable? The mask, is that now going to be a cultural norm? To what happens in the real estate business. If you don't need to live in commuting distance from the office, what does that do for the values? If you look at the history in the 14th century when there was a pandemic in Europe, that caused all sorts of secondary effects, including, over the next century, the building of most of the great cathedrals of Europe. So I will leave you with a question. As an innovator, what is your COVID-19 dividend? Because a crisis is an opportunity. As Joseph Schumpeter said, we need these gales of creative destruction in order to build new value. And we all know, we can recite that, the Second World War gave us radar, early computers, defibrillators. What are you going to take out of this crisis? Because it's not just transformation because of a virus that's going to shape new business opportunities. It's also climate change and what that's going to do to the public appetite to try new things. So I conclude with a company in China called Alibaba that went through a big pandemic called SARS in about 2003. They realized people wanted to buy everyday products. It was hard. They recalibrated the organization to become the most amazing consumer marketplace. Alibaba hasn't looked back. Airbnb, Uber, companies like this came out of the 2008 financial crisis. So what's going to happen now for restaurants that may need to transform into food manufacturing and delivery businesses? What's going to happen when speed can't be fought? When the demands for change are instant? And not just if you're the people in China who built a 650,000 square foot hospital in Wuhan in just 10 days. So I'm David Rowan. These are some of the issues, the stories I'm addressing. Thanks for listening.